All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. The first big announcement I have today is that Carson Eilers is not in the room. And so if you know anything about how we operate, that is the sketchiest thing we could possibly have done to try to run an LPC, but we're going to make it work. The other thing is we are, because the UEOC was running right about to 12 o'clock noon, we do not have a board member here to get us going. So we will do minutes in a couple of minutes, but we're going to jump to the discussion on what we have in front of us. So we have Wayne Niederhauser here, who's going to give us an update on homelessness, talk to us about where we're at right there, and then we'll go back to doing the minutes and everything else. So Wayne, we'll pass it off to you. For everyone in the room and as well as everybody that we've got online. So.
Okay. Thank you, Justin, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you about what happened in the legislative session about homelessness. It was one of the top issues, if not the top issue. It was in the governor's budget. The governor had an aggressive ask of the legislature to fund housing and homeless services. The initial ask was close to $200 million. And the governor's office of planning and budget would have asked for quite a bit less, but there wasn't a lot of ongoing funds to appropriate this year, especially with an anticipated tax cut. So there was some one-time funds and some that the legislature had stashed away. And so in the governor's budget, there was a lot of one-time funds that we would spend over 3 years for homelessness and then work on a long-term solution, a dedicated funding stream, something like that. If we're ever really going to get on top of homelessness in the state, you're going to have to resource it. And so it became a big issue. And because it became very apparent to a lot of legislators, there was some legislation also that followed that, some that we welcomed and some that we didn't. And so we worked with sponsors and got to a pretty good place at the end of the day. First of all, House Bill 298 by Representative Clancy, that passed, that created a new board that would oversee homelessness in the state, 11-member board, and replace the 29-member council that we've been operating under for 3 years. We had our first meeting of the board last week. It went very well. I like the smaller size of the board. We had some robust discussions that we really hadn't had as a council before. And these are the kind of discussions that we're going to need to have. We're going to really have to dig into a number of things statewide. We didn't get any money for housing like we had done over the last couple of years. And if you've heard me speak at all, you've heard these statistics. I'll get that one out. California has the highest rate of homelessness in the country, 44 people per 10,000. It may be surprising to you, but the lowest rate, the state with the lowest rate of homelessness is Mississippi, 5 per 10,000. Utah is 11 per 10,000. When you look at regions of the country, the lowest rates of homelessness are in the Midwest and in the South, Mississippi, Iowa, Kansas, and those areas. And we did this, it's been probably 2.5 years ago, so I use this data all the time. We overlaid the cost of housing on that data, and it matches identically, except for a couple of outliers. You know, it doesn't seem like a housing issue, but Mississippi has homelessness at 5 per 10,000, the lowest cost of housing in the country. The cost of housing is a central issue to homelessness. And so we've been working on getting programs that will increase the amount of housing that we have. But we know that housing alone does not work. You're going to have support services with people that have behavioral and mental health issues to be successful in this space. We recently had Mill Creek approve. Well, I guess I don't know if it was an approval, but there was a mental health facility located there, 43 additional beds to address mental illness in females experiencing that issue in their life. Our state hospital, I know, has been struggling over the last few years, not necessarily with funding, but with actually getting people to work there. But the state hospital isn't the answer for all of our mental health issues. Step-down facilities, permanent supportive housing, that is the answer to address mental illness. And our statistics show that we have probably about 2,000 of the 4,000 people that we've counted homeless in the state have a severe mental illness. If we can attack and address mental illness, we'll take a big bite out of homelessness in this state. So with that in mind, we were really pushing to get more money for housing. We've done that over the last couple of years and got $100 million. And we created 1,800 units of deeply affordable housing across the state with that money. Kim Gardner Institute shows that we have a deficit of 77,000. So for every 100 households that have a median income, average median income of 30%, or 30% of the median income, there are 3 units they can afford. 100 households, 3 units. I'm a real estate developer. When I got into this space, I did a deep analysis into why we didn't have more deeply affordable housing. Why don't we have more workforce housing? 50% area median income to 80% area median income. You probably have some of your people that work for you, some of your emergency service folks that can't afford a housing in your community. Why is that? Why isn't that housing available? It doesn't pencil. It will never attract capital naturally. It will never happen without some help. So we got to have some programs to make that happen in order to have that kind of housing. And unfortunately, with the rise of the cost of housing here in our state, we have a lot of people on the edge of housing insecurity. There's a lot of vulnerabilities of folks. I would rather keep them in housing rather than them slip into homelessness. Of course, there are a lot of safety nets out there. A lot of people have family that will help them, but there are some that don't. And what do we do about that? On-street camping has been increasing. Youth homelessness is increasing. And chronic homelessness is increasing, which that is people with disabilities, mental illness, and so forth. But we were successful in getting additional money this year for additional shelter. And I'll give a couple of data points with that. We need in Salt Lake County about 1,000 additional beds. And you might think, wow, that's double what we have now, or more than double. Over the last couple of winters, through a process that was mandated by the legislature, the Salt Lake County mayors and Salt Lake County have gotten together and come up with a winter plan. And this last year, that plan included 650 additional beds than what we have year round in Salt Lake County. 650 beds. Well, we filled all of them during the winter, every single one. And we had an additional 200 code blue beds. And on code blue nights, once people understood code blue, those were full. So 850 beds full, as well as our 700 beds that we normally have for individuals, and about 300, Mayor, I saw Marcus Stevenson here, Mayor Stevenson. Oh, there you are back there. I think that we have around about 300 people in the family shelter. On an average, it ebbs and flows based on the size of families. But these are additional. And so the legislature gave us $25 million to find another spot that would be year round, because nobody wanted us to release all those individuals, those 650 individuals, back out onto the street on April 30th when the winter plan ends. And statutorily, we can't require anybody to keep those beds open. So fortunately, we did keep most of those open. We did lose about 100 of them, but we've been able to keep those folks into shelter now through the summer. And we're now into the process for next winter planning. And it's a big ask, 900 beds. Seems like a lot, but we've proven that we need them. And it would be better if we just had a year-round facility to accommodate individuals experiencing homelessness. But at the end of the day, what's going to be the big solution here is having permanent supportive housing. And I emphasize supportive housing. I could take you all to some facilities that have these units, and where people really get stabilized and get off the street, get stabilized, get back to some functionality. And that is our goal. So we did get that money, and we got additional money to support the homeless system statewide. I know that some other counties are working on their plan, Utah County and Davis County in particular, and appreciate all the work that they're doing to create at least some winter beds this next winter. That helps Salt Lake County. People are not having to come travel to Salt Lake County to get those services. It would be better if we can meet these issues where they start. And as I always present, every community is a source of homelessness. You may not think that your community is, but it is. People get evicted. People have mental illness in your community. People acquire behavioral health issues and end up in homelessness. Every community is a source. And what is your community doing about it to help meet it where it happens? Or are we just allowing other communities to take care of it? So this is a statewide problem. It happens in every community, and we all need to be involved in seeing, making sure that we have the housing and the services to deal with this, so that we don't have people shortening their life, getting addicted to substances. And by the way, it's not just drugs that people get addicted to in this space. It's alcohol, a legal drug, by the way. I think it's either, if it's not the top drug out on the street, it's second, number two, and that affects people. And it's domestic violence that results, and all the other things that we have to deal with in society. Let's see, that's kind of that's the funding that we got. There were some other bills passed, Ellison 421, regarding a lot of things he addressed, but mental health, that continuum that we need to really improve in the state, so that we have a continuum that people can move up and down based on their based on what's happening to them currently in their life, moving up and down healthily, in a healthy way, having warm handoffs rather than gaps for them to fall through back into homelessness. I go out on the street every week except for when I'm on vacation, and meet with a group of people who are experiencing homelessness. And what I see is that most of them are struggling with re-entering into society after being in incarceration. It's a big contributor. Once you've been incarcerated for a period of time and coming back out, you have a record. It's hard to get housing. It's hard to get a job. So, hey, I can't do it. It's hard. I'm just going to be homeless and use substances to give me some level of coping. That is the core. Those are our core issues. It does come down to trauma in people's lives and what's happened to them. And a lot of the things that we see are just symptoms of homelessness. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Jason Christensen with Kaysville. In Davis County, as you mentioned, they're working on a plan for the Code Blue, and that involves, I think, looking at their senior centers that the county owns in 3 of the cities in Davis County, which sounds like, you know, it could be a viable plan. However, we've mentioned the idea of a bus, which I'm told is just not a great idea for different reasons, that maybe it's inhumane or it doesn't work for various reasons, but I've never heard any specific reasons why that wouldn't work. In my mind, at least, transportation is a big part of the issue, that wherever a Code Blue shelter is located, there's going to be a system that needs to get people to and from that location. And I've seen in other parts of the country where they've got buses that they're actually pretty nice. They've got privacy, there's beds, private kind of quarter area, living areas. But I'd just be curious what your take is on that, what you've seen as to whether that's an effective method or not.
That's a great question. And frankly, I don't know. I've never seen any outcome data with regards to a temporary shelter being a bus. I can see there's probably some merits to those things, but I haven't seen any data on that. Sorry about that. You know, we've been focused on having some permanent place for people to go, to have services, to try and get them back into a more regulated life. And you know, I guess there's some possible ways for a bus to work in that way. I just don't know of those. And if you don't mind, I would like to learn more about that. And if you know of places where this has been successful, it'd be interesting to at least look at it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Wayne?
Yes.
Mike Winder, Mill Creek. What's the timeline of the sanctioned campground, and will that be a year-round thing when it gets going?
First of all, sanctioned camping isn't anything that we espouse as the Office of Homeless Services. People living in tents is not something that we think is a workable solution at all. There are some people that do sanction camping, like Denver, and some other cities that have just opened up an area, then people come in and pitch their tents, or they provide tents. The problem with tents are that they're flimsy, there's some weather issues, and when it gets cold, guess what? They're looking to go inside and not be in the tent. So good segue though into what we did this last winter. Having been on the street and talked with a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness, there's a couple of common things. One of those things that are common is stress, anxiety. There isn't any person I've ever met on the street that doesn't have high anxiety. And I get into a lot of that, but we don't have time for it. And so when we discovered some models out there, one of them was in Austin, Texas, another one's in Reno, of using like a cottage or a little shed, so to speak, as a alternative to a tent. We dug into that and have discovered that that would be a better solution. And we piloted that this year on 6th West and 3rd South. And if you want to see it, you can drive by there. It's behind a fence that has some sheeting on it, so it's hard to see. But we bought 50 units. They're about 8 by 10. They're heated and cooled. So people can stay there in the winter. The door is locked. So first of all, their person, they feel like their personal self is safe because they can lock the door. That their personal belongings, what we will allow to fit in there, because some want to put a lot of stuff in there and there's just not room. They feel like that's safe. And so we call them the micro shelters. They're more trauma informed because there are a lot of people that resist going into a congregate shelter. That's the first thing we ask them to do. Come and sleep in a room with 50 people tonight. If you have triggers, if you have some mental illness, people don't want to do that. They've done that. They don't feel safe in a congregate shelter. And so we know over the last couple of winters in providing at some hotels of some personal space that the outcomes are a lot better. And I just talked with, we have some data on this, but I actually talked to a lady that's been in the micro shelters just last Friday night. And she said she wouldn't go to anything else and it's been a wonder for her. And the first couple of days that she was there, she slept. Because you don't get sleep living on the street, worried about your personal safety, whether somebody's going to harm you or you're going to be moved on. So I can tell you right now, the non-congregate type of shelter, micro shelter, is a really good solution if our objective is to get people off the street, which it is, because unsanctioned camping, what you see on Victory Road and some of these other places along the Jordan River is, I believe, unacceptable. People are living in places not fit for human habitation, and they need to be in a place. It's an 8 by 10 personal space. There's a congregate bathroom, but we have proven over the winter that that is a good solution, and we'll look to duplicating it, quadruplicating it in the future. Thanks. Does that answer your question, Mike? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Before we move on, we wanted to take a minute and introduce an intern that we have with us for the next month. She is visiting us here with a pretty prestigious cohort from Jordan. And so I want to turn the time over to her to just say hello and tell us a little bit about herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sajra Salam from Jordan, Kingdom of Jordan, Middle East. I'm here as a fellow with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. I work as legal researcher and here with the UGLIB program with IREX. It's good to see all of you, and I hope you enjoy your time. Thank you.
We have to do some official business, and this is the time where being the second VP comes in handy. Because we need to, as I like to refer to it, the, Prince Harry of the board. So we have to approve some of our minutes from our last meeting during the legislative session, our February 26th meeting. So I actually need a formal motion to approve those. Looks like we have Mayor Silvestrini. Do we have a second? We have Dan Dugan in the back. Dan, this has been your role all day. Thank you. Second. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Justin, we've now done our formal parts. Am I done?
You're done.
I'm done.
You'll have to close this out at the end. All right. Okay. Thank you. First, thank you, Wayne, for being here. Appreciate that. We know you've got a busy schedule, so appreciate you being there. And we're a little bit out of order, but that's because this is the time that Wayne could come. So let me slow it down a little bit and officially re-welcome you to LPC. For those of you who are, is anyone brand new? First time LPC in the room? All right, y'all are old hat at this. So let me run through what we're going to talk about today. Remind you a little bit about where you can find some of the resources for the legislative wrap up, some of the other resources from this last session. We're going to talk a little bit about the research plan. We're going to talk a little bit about the advisory groups we want to work on during this next summer. Give you some interim updates, talk about UEOC, talk about upcoming meetings, and then get out of here. So with that, let me get this a little smaller. There we go. If you have not seen it yet, our legislative recap and spring trainings, if you go to ulct.org/wrap, you can see all of the bills. Well, not all of the bills. The biggest bills that we were tracking, the wrap-ups we have on those, some of the descriptions of what's in those bills. So if you haven't yet looked at that document, ulct.org/wrap will give you our wrap-up document there. On top of that, but don't see any more phones up. We also did some spring trainings. If you missed any of these, those are also on the website. You can go back. You can take a look at some of those. We're going to hide these meeting controls really quick. ulct.org/events/spring training. If you go to the wrap, that's also there. But we've done wrap-ups on land use legislation, transportation legislation, general government administration. So if you didn't get a chance to attend those webinars that we did and you want to go back and look at them, there's actually a lot of great content there. Land use training, I myself have gone back and watched it like 3 times, trying to figure out exactly what we did this last legislative session. So if you need those resources, they're on the website. I just encourage you to take advantage of those. Let's see, it doesn't want to, there we go. We've also done other trainings, our local administrative advisor training. So if you remember, we started the local administrative advisor program last year, and we're doing regular trainings with that. A lot of these are sort of 101s. So if you need reminders about how things work, if you have people on your staffs in your cities who want reminders, we've done some on sales tax, property tax, truth in taxation, local government 101, budgeting basics, OPMA trainings. Jared, Todd, lots of guys in our office have been involved at these. We've had people from your cities involved. So if there are trainings that you think would be useful, we would love a reminder on how to do fill in the blank, please let us know. But also we've got these on our website. If you go to ulct.org/resources/LAA, we've got all those trainings on there. You can also go to the YouTube channel and we've got all the trainings loaded on there. So just want to remind you and make you aware that we've got a lot of resources out there. We've got a lot of trainings. If there are things, again, that you would like us to see covered in a training, please let us know, and then we'll ask you to do it. With all the experts. So want to talk about a little bit about the research, and normally Carson would be up here doing this. Carson is our research guru. But the first time in the 7 years Carson has been with the league, he's taking a vacation over LPC, which I think is excellent because he should. Because of all the work he does. So that's why I'm up here talking about the research for a second. But just as all of you know, as people have come to a lot of LPCs, we used a lot of Slido during this last session. We're going to keep using Slido because we're getting some great data out of it. We tried to really focus on answerable and precise questions, and we had nearly 3,000 responses just during the 2024 session, not to mention all the other Slido questions we asked you throughout the year. So a few things that we learned, a few metrics we learned from the research, not just Slido, but other polls we put out there. Local governments have permitted 155,000 plus housing units in the past 5 years. When we were talking about 185, was talking with building inspectors, 99% plus of inspections occur within 3 business days of the date requested. We also have 190,000 entitled units out there. These are all numbers that changed the course of the discussion during the legislative session. The research that we have makes a difference. And the only way we get that data is if you give it to us. We don't have a lot of other ways to get it. So just to tell you a few things that we're going to be looking at this year, so you can start thinking about if there are ways to collect this data, if there's things that we need. These are priorities that we know we're going to tackle this next year. One, infrastructure, costs, needs, etc. One of the big discussion points across several different legislative topics is where's the infrastructure? As we're growing, as we're replacing infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion around this, both in the water, land use, housing. We're talking a lot about infrastructure. So we are definitely going to be doing some research, asking questions about what infrastructure needs, costs, et cetera, look like. Parking is another big one. We had lots of discussions about parking last year. We anticipate there being more discussions around what parking looks like as we grow more this year. So look for that. Housing and land use characteristics, some that we've looked at before, we're going to continue. And costs for cities to comply with legislation. This is one that we've heard loud and clear from you, is that, you know, one bill's not that big a deal. You can comply with a bill. But there's not really a good system for tracking the compliance costs and time for 20 different bills that you now have to change a form on, you have to change a policy on, you have to update an ordinance on. So we're going to try to look at ways to capture those costs, to aggregate those costs, to comply with the legislation that's coming out there. That's one that we heard from you. We heard that at our mid-year conference and other places. So that's one we want to delve into. Now, there's also tentative research. We would love to do nothing but research all the time, but we actually have to advocate for things, and legislative session always gets in the way of stuff too. But there are other things that we may be reaching out towards. So these are tentative. So if you're saying, you know, you guys should look at this, yes, it's on the list, but time bandwidth, we'll see. So housing and land use survey, we've sent that out last couple of years. We very well may send that out again this year. Looking at scope, impact, et cetera, around ADUs, we do anticipate this being a subject that gets talked about this next year. Looking at revenue profiles, short-term rental counts across the state, RDACR budget analysis, moderate income housing reports and strategies, and finally, public safety employee survey, which is a continuation of a survey we've done the last few years. So that's a lot of things. That's a lot of different research projects that Carson is going to be mostly undertaking as our policy director. We all work with him on that, but we want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck on that research. So please, as we send this out, as we send out requests for data, for research, for information, we're trying to be judicious that we don't over survey and give survey fatigue. So if we are asking for data, these are the things that we need the very most. We're trying not to ask for anything that is just nice to know. We're looking for things that really will make a difference as far as the policy discussion. So just one more ask: if we send you research requests, please try to help us out by filling those out. Again, they make a massive difference. So with that, we're going to move on and talk about interim and UEOC updates. What is coming up this next year? So here's a horrible slide with a lot of dates on it. But this is, take a picture, we'll send it out. Everything in black there are interim dates. So, and the other blue ones are UEOC and CHA. So let's do a quick reminder of what these are. So interim are the regular interim committees that the legislature holds every summer, fall, winter, leading up to legislative session. These are made up of legislators, the House and the Senate, combined to make an interim committee. These are standing committees. They have lots of study items that we'll talk about, but the black ones are the legislative interims. Among those are also appropriation subcommittees. Now, these are the ones that help build the budget, again, made up of senators and representatives, and the appropriation subcommittees meet throughout the interim as they build out the budget. They look at requests for funding. So if your municipality has a request for funds, you want to start talking to your legislators now so they can put those in there. The ones in blue are the CHA, the Commission on Housing Affordability, and the UEOC, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. These are separate from the regular interim meetings. These are also a combination of senators and representatives, but also are made up of other people from the governor's cabinet, people from the community, that come and talk about wider ranging issues. We had the first UEOC meeting this morning. We've got that schedule on there. But between these two things, there are things happening every single month where policies are being discussed, being moved forward. you can see it's a busy schedule. So there's a lot coming up. We'll give you updates throughout the year on what those all are. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Cameron Dill, to give a little update about what we expect to see out of the Commission on Housing's affordability, out of the UEOC, and then I'll come back up and talk about other interim things.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. And thanks, everybody, both the 80 or so online and everybody in the room. Thank you to Mayor Ramsey, who was just at the Capitol with Justin and me and with Councilmember Bradshaw and others for the UEOC meeting. And so before I jump into that, the CHA piece, during the UEOC meeting that wrapped up 40-ish minutes ago, they finalized their schedule and they basically acknowledged that of the three subgroups within the UEOC, the subgroup that was going to be the busiest was going to be the Commission on Housing Affordability again. Oh, I heard a cheer. So the UEOC will have those three subcommittees, or not subcommittees, excuse me. They'll have three statutory groups that report back to the UEOC, the Commission on Housing Affordability, Women in the Economy, and then the Talent and Economy Alignment Group. I bring those up because you'll see in a moment when we talk about our advisory groups, how they'll align with those statutory groups. Then the UEOC itself, I'll talk about what they are going to focus on, but I'll start with the CHA. This is a slide from the Gardner Policy Institute that has made the rounds the last few weeks. This slide demonstrates that at the end of 2022, Utah was the most unaffordable housing market in history. But now these couple of slides also from that same presentation, some of which were presented to the legislature last week, I think are actually quite insightful in light of what's happened the last couple of legislative sessions. So one, you've seen this massive increase in the share of renter households that can't afford a median priced home. That's stabilized a little bit over the last year or so, but really spiked up in 2021 and 2022. And it's far more, but it's far more feasible and affordable to rent than it is to own. The talking cast hands, do I just move that? Okay, good. There we go. There, I was hiding the key data point there. That was unfortunate placement. But the point here is you have a huge chunk of Utahns that are stuck renting and are not able to afford single family homes. Then you've also seen the market, as we all know, the last few years that has shifted to building housing for corporate ownership or for rental properties as opposed to owner occupied properties. So I don't have the slide, but Steve Waldrop in a couple of meetings that I've attended the last couple of weeks has cited, I don't have the data with me, but he cited a really stark number of the percentage of new housing units in 2022 and 2023 that were sold to investors and sold to landlords as opposed to owner occupied. I'm not going to repeat the number because I heard a couple of different numbers and I don't have the data, but it was a staggering amount. So when you think about last year and all of the emphasis that we put on affordable home ownership, this data demonstrates that need, and I think demonstrates the unity among state leaders, local leaders, and the private sector to solve this piece of the equation. Okay, now this was actually shared, the slide about the shortage increase, and it was shared this morning at the UEOC. And again, I think there's good, bad, and incomplete news to tell from that. We peaked at a shortage of 56,000 units in 2017. By 2022, that shortage had been cut in half, and then it's been creeping up basically once interest rates went up. So you can see the numbers now at about 37,000, but that correlates to the timing of when we saw the increase in interest rates and production has slowed down. And then this is another Gardner Policy Institute data point that they've been circulating, that by 2030, how many more units do we need? Now, what's interesting is the housing demand is 153,000 housing units. Based on the research that Carson did with all of your help last year, we analyzed there are about 190,000 entitled units that we're still waiting for building permits. So the amount of housing units planned for and the amount of housing need over the next 7 years or so, there's some interesting alignment there. But I give you all this so that you're aware that we just finished UEOC. Last week, we had interim meetings, and there were 3 different interim committees that were talking about housing. We presented in several of them to talk about what's happened over the last few years and giving time for those bills to actually flourish. but the political pressure won't go away. And I think we all agree that we want to drive toward more affordable homeownership. So this morning, the day started the League Board of Directors meeting, and the League Board, in addition to doing the league's tentative budget, which thank you very much, League Board members, for reviewing the tentative budget, also reaffirmed these principles that actually they affirmed last year, that were really the foundation of our advocacy with the Commission on Housing Affordability last year and paid dividends. They reaffirmed them this morning, really focused on quality of life, sustainability of infrastructure, affordability, and ownership. And we often combine C and D to say affordable home ownership. So the board unanimously reaffirmed these principles and these core questions that we'll be raising as we advocate within the CHA and within all of the subgroups in the CHA. Okay. Let me pause there and just see, are there any questions about what I just presented before we pivot to the topics that are on the list for consideration this summer? Okay, I see Councilmember Shelton over here, and then Cassidy, let me know if there's anybody online.
Thanks, Cameron. I wonder if there's any discussion about allowing cities to require developers to sell a certain number of their units versus rent them, because we actually have no authority
Yep.
to do that right now.
Excellent question, council member, and it's one that came up quite a bit during our spring listening tour. We've spent the last couple of months attending countless conferences, COGS and COM meetings, doing the webinars and trying to get feedback from members. And that concept you just described has come up a double-digit number of times. We've had a couple of meetings, well, more than a couple. We've had quite a few meetings with Steve Waldrop and his team over the last few weeks. And that question of what can government require when it comes to ownership is a sticky one. And it's one that he brought up in one of the recent CHA meetings, is saying, I'm not sure what the answer is here, but I hear this loud and clear from the policymakers, also hear from constitutional perspective and property rights perspective. What's the proper role of government in regulating the ownership? So yes, that issue is out there, and that actually sets up nicely to the CHA list. Before I go to the CHA list, though, are there any other questions in the CHA space, or kind of the context before I get to the topics? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Mayor Ramsey, I'm going to put you on notice that after I present this, then while everything was happening at the CHA and you were speaking up, we built a slide for you so you can come up and give a report on the UEOC. So you've got a good 2-minute prep here to be ready for it. So within the CHA, there are going to be 4 subgroups. This is not new. The CHA has had subgroups every year for all the years of its existence. The 4 groups have more topics, but this is kind of the general summary of them. Group 1 is going to be looking at publicly owned land. So that's everything from SITLA land to UTO land, to UDOT land, to city-owned land, school district land, any sort of publicly owned land. Dovetails nicely with the Your Land, Your Plan initiative that the league has been working on the last few years. The second key piece, and for those of you who are in the large city caucus at mid-year, this one should ring true to you because this was a huge focus of that conversation, but trying to facilitate home ownership, particularly for first-time home buyers in established cities. So older cities, built-out cities, that was a big point of emphasis in the large city caucus at mid-year, but we've heard about it from lots of different communities. And that's one, you'll hear Steve Waldrop use the term legacy city. That's what he means. Our terminology is established city, but that's what he's going for, is you're seeing more and more of the housing stock in those older established cities flip to rental units, or they're becoming too expensive for first-time home buyers to come in. And then in a lot of those cities in recent years, you're seeing school closures and you're seeing really the hollowing out of neighborhoods. So what, if anything, can be done to facilitate owner occupancy and first-time home buyers in those neighborhoods? The third piece, corporate ownership, including vacation rentals. This is also not new. We've had several work groups in recent years that have looked at vacation rentals, but this group wants to look at it again, and then reviewing the existing tools including the tax increment financing. Some of you may have seen the back and forth between Commissioner John Valentine and Governor Cox and other legislative leaders about the tax increment tools that the legislature has passed. Most of those headlines focused on the sports-related tax increment financing tools, but several of the housing bills this past session also rely on tax increment. So Commissioner Valentine, in several settings now, including last week at the Revenue and Taxation Interim Committee, recommended that the legislature do a deeper dive on all these different tax increment tools to see if these are the most efficient ways moving forward, and then look at potential consequences of having all these different increment tools, and if they're working in harmony one with another. So I expect Group 1's going to look at that, and even if Group 1 doesn't do a deep dive there, I think Revenue and Taxation Committee is going to, and it came up in political subdivisions last week too. So that'll be Group 1. Group 2, we've called this the Land Use Task Force Group. The Land Use Task Force, as a quick reminder, is a collection of attorneys and planners on the local government side, cities and counties, that meet regularly with the property rights coalitions of the home builders and developers and realtors and others to work on land use related legislation and try to solve problems that arise out of LUDMA. We got some really good feedback from the Municipal Attorneys Association in particular this spring about potential improvements to LUDMA that we'll be bringing forward. Not everything that goes to Land Use Task Force is CHA related, and not everything that goes to Group 2 is going to be Land Use Task Force related. We'll be trying to coordinate those. The list that the CHA discussed a couple of weeks ago included looking at potential changes around zoning and regulation as it relates to parking, which isn't new. That came up last year and ultimately didn't go anywhere, but we surveyed this group multiple times on it. More density requirements, and then all types of ADUs, not just internal ADUs, infrastructure, funding and maintenance, permitting and inspections process. They haven't brought up SB 185, but we think they'll bring it up at some point herein. And then the role of public input in the land use process, which we addressed to a degree with the subdivisions bill a couple of years ago. So most of these are still at a pretty high level. There are no specific proposals yet, but they were what came out of the CHA brainstorming session a couple of weeks ago. Group 3 is going to be looking at data. So some of the data I was just showing you from the Gardner Institute, but also the data that we've collected. And one of the new requirements in the modern income housing plans this year is the data collection around entitled units to better inform the dialogue of what cities are already doing on the ground. That's going to inform the creation of a state housing plan. Governor Cox has essentially required Steve Waldrop and his office to create a state housing plan going forward. And he has, in concept, based it off of the Unified Plan for Transportation. And the details are still very much in flux. Like, this is the beginning of that effort, but he has held up the Unified Plan that all local governments participate in, as well as UDOT and UTA and MAG and WFRC and all of the MPOs and AOGs. And so this is the crown jewel nationwide for transportation coordination. Can we do something similar on housing? That's as far as it is right now, but just know that's part of the dialogue. And then Group 4, actually the name of Group 4 is Other, and there are a variety of things in the Other group, but it includes the two that are most relevant, we think, to local governments, is conversion from office to housing, and what building code challenges may be in the way there. And then there's been an interesting discussion in other states around property tax exemptions, not just for true low income, deeply affordable type housing, but for the next step above. So California is actually having this conversation now about extending property tax exemption to a larger swath of housing. And obviously there are a lot of consequences if you start carving out a huge chunk of property taxpayers from paying property tax, and what that means to local governments. The league will have representation on all 4 of these groups. Right now, their plan is to limit the overall group to 12 total people. But now we got the commitment I renewed this morning that we'll have at least 2 to 4 league reps on each of these. That includes the 3 city reps that are statutorily members of the CHA. So those 3 will be on here. I'll be on some of these. Other league staffers might be. Mayor Silvestrini, Steve Waldrop confirmed this morning that he was supportive of you being one of the reps here. So we're still filling out these reps. We have to get this filled out really by this week. So we are looking for you know, if we're looking for a couple of other volunteers, like we've got a list we've been working down, particularly for group 1 and group 2, because we want a couple of elected officials in each of those groups. So we're working through that list, but if somebody comes to mind, let us know. We want to have a mix of electeds and staff, recognizing we have a very small universe of people who can be directly on these work groups. This is also why, in a moment, Justin's going to talk about the CHA advisory group that the league board confirmed this morning, and that we'll be asking for volunteers from this group to help inform and advise the negotiators that will be involved in these different groups. Okay. Questions, JJ?
Group 1B with first homes there, does that include a discussion about the feasibility of condo and townhome construction? Which is, I know that's been a topic of discussion, but yeah, that's something we're very interested in. Just
Yep.
for sale product that is multifamily.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, and the answer to JJ's question is yes. Looking at potential obstacles around condos is part of that little B. And one thing I should have noted, the last time we actually had LPC in this meeting, feels like a bygone era. 6 months ago, the weather was very similar actually, last December. And at that time, we stood here and said, the governor has this plan, has this idea on essentially a statewide density bonus. It was minimum base density in every residential zone in the area. And he wanted feedback on it or alternatives. And at that point, we asked the LPCs that we're going to put together a quick, we had a fun term for it, but it was do you remember the term was? Strike force, there you go, strike team, that's what it was, the housing strike team. So we had a dozen or so LPC members that were part of that strike force that met almost daily for about a month leading up to the session. And JJ was one of them from Clearfield, and there were several of you that participated in that. And that intensive work led to a lot of the pivots that we had during the session. So, you know, those of you who were involved in that group in December and January, thank you. And we may end up doing something like that again as we go forward. Today, when we asked for volunteers for the advisory group, we're going to be a little more inclusive rather than unlimited, at least at this point. Mark.
So on group 4 with property tax,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, our neck of the woods, and let's just say property tax is 3/4 of the school district.
Yeah.
By doing what they're proposing to do, which is to waive property taxes or something along those lines, would you just make sure that they understand all they're doing is reassessing the cost to the other property tax owners and the other property tax payers? So even if they waived the property tax, essentially what they're doing is causing the school districts to charge everyone else an incremental higher property tax to subsidize that.
Yep.
It's shifting who's paying for what.
Yep.
And so I guess fundamentally, what they're doing is also setting the schools up for even bigger financing problems and other things. That's a pretty hot issue down in our neck of the woods. And so again, just make sure that they're understanding the implications of this is shifting the tax burden. It's not making it go away.
Yeah, great points, Mark. And I can tell you the school districts were really concerned about where some of the housing bills ended up this past session because of the emphasis on tax increment and their ability to pay for services and infrastructure going forward. And I think I'll come back to the core principle here, that letter B about sustainability of infrastructure. If you take away our property tax over here, you're undermining the sustainability of infrastructure, and infrastructure includes more than just roads. It's really, we're talking about all the public services that we provide there. So excellent points. Any other questions about the CHOP? Yep, Angela, I've got a microphone up here, and then Mayor Ramsey, I'll turn it to you in a moment to talk UEOC, and then we'll explain the advisory groups.
Katie Vellani from Midway. I'm just wondering, what kind of a time commitment do you expect for people who volunteer for the committees like Group 1 and 2?
Yep, no, great question. Realistically, these groups are significant time commitment. What Justin will explain in a moment after Mayor Ramsey does the UEOC overview is we're going to ask for volunteers to be part of the advisory group, and it'll be larger. We're not going to limit that to 10 to 12 or 2 to 4 people, because we want to make sure we've got perspectives from Saratoga Springs to Midway and everybody in between. And that'll be a smaller time commitment. We're still working through those logistics, but what worked really well last year was when we had our LPC work group focused on infrastructure, looking at what later became House Bill 13, the infrastructure finance in districts, and the transportation utility fee, is that advisory group could really dig into the weeds, work through some policy questions, and then we brought back the recommendation to the LPC and to the league board of, we could work with this, this is unacceptable, and that helped inform the bills. And then recognizing that, again, using last year, that there was a transportation utility fee work group, and it only included 4 city people. It included Roger, included me, included Isaac Paxman from Provo, and Wayne Parker, Provo. So there were only 4 of us in the room, but we had 30 people we were regularly that informed us as we were negotiating. We got to a pretty good spot on that bill. Mr. Pace.
Yes, thanks, Cameron. Lynn Pace, Sandy City. Relative to this structure that you've got listed here, do you anticipate that people working on these subcommittees will be meeting with the CHA, or will they be sort of side meetings that then get reported back to the CHA? I'm just wondering how much we'll work with this framework versus sort of parallel to it. That makes sense.
Yes, yeah, good questions. And what I anticipate will happen is the 2 to 4 league reps in each of these groups will meet regularly with the advisory group that Justin will describe in a moment to get feedback from that advisory group. And then those 2 to 4 reps will then advocate accordingly in these groups. And then these groups will include people beyond just the league. So our folks will be advocating there. And then at some point, these will come back to the UEOC, where Mayor Ramsey will consider them. So like, for example, I'm going to be on one of these groups. And so I want to hear from the advisory group what works, what doesn't, so that as we're in there negotiating, we know. And then it'll all go back to the full CHA, and then from the full CHA back to the UEOC, and then the UEOC back to the legislative interim. So we mentioned this a few years ago, and the legislature created the CHA and created the UEOC. They basically created a parallel interim process. So they doubled the amount of work during the interim. So does that answer your question about how we're going to try to organize it, Mayor?
So I just want to say that if you get on one of these advisory committee groups, if you're interested in doing that, I mean, I was just trying to explain the time. Each one of these meetings is 2 to 2.5 hours. And then there is extra time spent with our league group in terms of formulating what our strategy is going to be. So it's a significant time commitment. And the other thing that I'll say too is bring your feistiness. If you want to be on one of these, you've got to be prepared to push back against people from the Property Rights Coalition. And, you know, it's civil, and it's not like, you know, brawling, but you have to be prepared to be aggressive and advance the arguments that we have so that we don't get rolled.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Okay. So we're building out our 2 to 4 reps on these committees or on these groups. So if you have a name in mind you think could be good, let us know. Recognize again, it's very, very limited, and we will then have the larger advisory group to make sure people are involved that way, which Justin will explain. I also had someone just text me who pointed out that when I said from Saratoga Springs to Midway and everyone in between, it actually only includes like 10 communities. But in my defense, you're sitting in different sides of the room. So anyway, I just want to point out, I know my geography. I realize that didn't quite work the way I visualized it. Okay. So Mayor Ramsey, I'll turn it over to you to give the update on what was discussed at the UEOC, and then Justin will come back to talk through the advisory groups.
Thanks, and thanks for putting together a little slide of notes. I've brought all my paperwork just in case. Okay, this is a little out of order of how we did it. So I'll just go through what this slide says. It was a good meeting this morning. It was our first meeting leading into the 2025 legislative session. This morning, we were sworn in for the 4th time, start of the 4th year as a UEOC. We have a strong emphasis that we're going to put on the Olympics and preparation for the Olympics. We have not received that official announcement, but July 24th is the date that the official announcement is expected. And the governor is supposed to be in Paris that day to sign the agreement for us to host the Olympics again. So we have no reason to believe that that will change, and probably July 24th is when we will get the world will get the official word that the Olympics are coming. So as we had a brainstorming session. What do we want Utah to look like in 2034? We have 10 years. What does that look like? What do we need the state of Utah to look like? Not just to host the games. What does Utah look like? And what do we need to do to be proactive, to lead and be visionary and drive to ensure that Utah looks the way we need it and want it to look in 10 years? So, and how will the Olympics have an impact on that? How can the Olympics help with that? Are there things that the Olympics can be beneficial for? As far as that vision, what is the vision? So today we had a major brainstorming session about what that vision is, what we want it to look like. And there's a big long list that was put together of very thoughtful things from categories, such a variety of categories. Everyone brought their ideas from their own personal take and their expertise. Very good list put together. Okay. Transportation, it was brought up a couple of times, a couple different ways. My input on that was in the transit area. We had a catalyst in 2002 for our transit system here along the Wasatch Front. And we've got several transit systems in the state, but UTA being the largest. And as we continue to grow as a state, what we don't want is people to come to the Olympics and say, oh, the games were great, but you couldn't get anywhere. You know, people are going to be staying in all of your communities. When they come for the Olympics, across most of the Wasatch Front, people will be staying. They're not all going to stay in downtown. It's not even feasible. They'll be staying everywhere. There will be venues everywhere. There's a lot that's going to be happening. And so we want to make sure we can move people around. Transportation funding, safety, transit, and vertiports. So my understanding is that Los Angeles is working to try to be vertiport ready by 2030, but they may not make it. It might not make it. There's a goal potentially that was thrown out today and seemed well received for us here for the Salt Lake City, Utah Games to be the first Olympic Games to be vertiport ready and to have that be part of what we offer to the world. So housing, quite a bit about housing. We don't want the Olympics to cause more problems with our housing shortages. We don't want people coming in right now as soon as the games are announced to start snatching up properties because they plan on making a ton of money on them once the Olympics come. We need to be very deliberate about how we approach housing and how we make sure that it doesn't actually add to the challenges that we have. Talked about overall public distrust, talked about how to overcome that, how to work through that. Margaret Bussey, who's over the Department of Commerce, had some really good comments about that. Tech and social media, it's a great concern. We had Natalie Gochner come and do at the start of every UEOC year, she comes and does an update. And she gave some really good information. And Ryan Starks, who's the director of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, said, don't just come in here and tell us we're doing great. We need you to give us the hard medicine. And she did. She did a really good job. She did a great job. And she told us we need to make sure we're not, what'd she say, sniffing our own fumes. One thing that we need to make sure we're not doing is sniffing our own fumes. You know what that means? Resting on our laurels and getting complacent and thinking, we're so great. We're the top state in America. We're doing everything right. Our city's going well. Our state's going well. We can't get complacent. She had some really strong, specific things to call out, and it was great. She brought the medicine that just helped keep it real. And I thought that was really good. She had some good notes. Some of Natalie's notes, not on this slide. Her summary, mental health is an economic development issue, and the state needs to make that a priority. Our communities, translate that to your community, a workforce development, an economic development issue, mental health. Student achievement, she had lots of data about student achievement. And so going back to what Mark said about if we're going to transition property tax and just stick it to the school district, so they have no choice but to raise because it's getting pulled from somewhere else. Student achievement is key. It is key. Utah was the only state in the nation whose 8th grader scores did not drop. Reading scores, 8th grade reading scores, only state in America whose scores did not drop post-COVID. We still have a lot of work to do. That's a good thing. We can't get complacent, and our student achievement, our higher ed achievement and our graduation rates, they could be a lot better. Our higher ed graduation rates could be quite a bit better. So she really dug into that. And quality over quantity with the economic development is what the state needs to prioritize. Quality over quantity. Let's see, we talked a lot about having enough water to by the Olympics time, by the time they come, having enough, having infrastructure, how to pay for it, continuing to conserve what it's going to cost. And this is kind of an aside. We did not discuss this morning, but just from me, I've heard a lot of chatter. You've probably heard this too. There's a lot of conversation in a lot of official circles about moving from, and this bill was even proposed by Dan McKay 2 years ago, I think, 2 sessions ago, about transitioning away from tax with water pricing to user fee water pricing, and you pay for what you use. So you're not going to get taxed for everybody's water. You're going to pay for what you use. And so the cost of per use of water, I serve on our water district. I serve on the state drinking water board. There's a lot of conversation about this. So that wasn't discussed this morning, but just know when it comes to water, there's a lot of conversations happening about that. Having diversity in our workforce, we have the lowest unemployment rate. Well, we have a lot of people here that we would love to put into jobs. We don't have enough workforce to fill all the jobs that are available. We have a lot of great people here in Utah. What are the barriers that keep some of them from being able to work and fill these jobs? And how do we help overcome those barriers to provide the training, to provide the credentials, to work to open employment opportunities and filling our job openings by folks who are here and would and could do the jobs? What are those barriers and how can we help diversify our workforce and open opportunities to work to more Utahns who right now aren't able to take those jobs? Our youth. Talked a lot about involving the youth with the Olympics. We talked a lot. Mental health came up, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times during that meeting. A lot of people brought up mental health. Sid Dixon, the state superintendent of public education, talked about tying the Olympic movement and overall health to education and to our kids, because mental health is such a struggle. And now you have Olympians that have come out and said, you know, I'm in good physical shape, but there's a real mental health issue about being an elite athlete, and it is really hard. And these are some things that we've done to overcome our own mental health challenges. How can we help them translate into teaching our students about that, about resiliency, and how can we use the Olympics to help strengthen that a strong mind and a strong body can and should go together. And as we work toward, not everyone has to be an athlete, of course, but as we work toward trying to emulate healthy, positive attributes from the Olympics and the Olympians, mental health needs to be just as important as the physical and overall well-being. We talked about air quality and healthy communities, and talked about healthy Utah and really bringing healthy Utah into this conversation to help create a positive opportunities. A lot of what you're doing in your communities, these opportunities that you're trying to provide for people to have access to trails and running outdoors and whatever, and getting off their phones and spending time as a family, maybe bringing healthy Utah in to really be part of holistically as a state. What can we do to help strengthen and promote that? State parks, access to the outdoors. It was even proposed that we have, what do we have, 47? We have 47 state parks in the state of Utah. And someone threw out, why don't we add 3 more and make it an even 50 by the Olympics? Why don't we shoot to have 50 state parks here in Utah to give more opportunities for people who come to visit? Lot of conversation about education, again, K-12, and then also higher ed. And what does higher ed look like? And how can higher ed continue to be structured in such a way that it is filling the pipeline for our workforce, and that we can have higher graduation rates? Natalie put up a slide about the graduation rates from each of the public colleges and universities, and they really all have a lot of room to improve. We all know a lot of young people who start school, graduation rates are not where they could be and probably where we need them to be. And that's totally separate from the conversation that college isn't for everyone, and there's other ways of it's a total separate conversation. But for those who are attending college, graduation rates are not as high as they should be. We have room to improve there for sure. Again, talked about incentives. You know, the state, Governor Cox, and since he's been in, has really taken a step back from incentives for economic development and said the state has to be, we're in a place where we can be a little more choosy. We can be a lot more choosy and really deliberate about where we do and do not throw incentives. And there was a lot of conversation about that. Back to what Natalie said, quality over quantity. We're not looking to bring 1 million companies, but it was talked about. We don't have a Fortune 500 company here in the state of Utah, but they'll all be coming to visit in 2034. What can we do to bring some of those size companies to get some of them here into Utah? And then also the targeted industries, which is on my phone and not with me. The targeted industries that Utah is going to be working on. So there's manufacturing, aerospace and defense. You guys, there's a couple of them, and I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but one data point that they shared was that nationwide, aerospace and defense positions pay an average of 55% higher than the average salary of many industries overall. So the more of those jobs that we can bring and help shore up here, the higher the pay is. And of course, the more prepared our workforce needs to be, but the better the outcomes can be. So we went over a lot of visioning. It was also stated today that instead of having so many subcommittees and working groups, like we had a ton last year, it was so many hours. There are people in this room that spent a lot of hours in all of those working groups. I think I was on 4, and Andrew spent 1 million hours, Cam, all the team, a lot of you. Jeff, there's a lot of people here that spent a ton of time in working groups. For the UEOC. They're going to do it different this year. They're not going to do them. There's 3 statutory committees. And then they're actually going to have the UEOC commissioners do a lot deeper dive and put in more time and more work and deeper dives on some of these things, rather than have the subcommittees and the working groups do a lot of that work and then bring it back and report it to the UEOC. The commissioners will be doing the deeper dives this year. So it's a different structure than how they've done it in the past, and we'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's it. There was a lot. There's so much more, but I think it was good, and we'll see how things go. I'm optimistic about it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Ramsey. So a lot going on. So let's talk about where we need help this year. So these are our proposed advisory groups for now. So we have a slide on this later. We were not meeting for LPC again until August 19th. So no LPC in June, no LPC in July, but we want to spend a lot of time diving into these. And like Cameron explained, these are going to be wider ranging advisory groups as we delve down into what these policies look like, as we get our hands around some of this. We're looking for help, looking for input. And then as we get further down into the year, as we get more specific in our negotiations, we'll pull into some more specific and smaller, nimble task or strike forces, for lack of a better term. That's kind of the direction we're going to be going. But again, if something else pulls up, we may have another advisory group. You never know. Keeps it exciting. So one, we talked about this a lot already, but Commission on Housing Affordability, we need people who want to help advise on this. This is not volunteering specifically for one of those work groups that was mentioned. This is for a larger group that will come together, discuss what's being discussed in those in the CHA working groups, give input on that. So again, input on that. Economic development and financing. There are a lot of these, again, with the UEOC and other places that are being discussed. This is our catch-all. Last year, we had what we called kind of our infrastructure group. We talked about TUF. We talked about infrastructure financing districts, IDS, as we're calling it at this point. So this could be TRT. This could be TUF. There's a lot of different things we could talk about, but economic development and financing. Third one, grandma on privacy. Jared is super excited about this one. If you could see his face, you'd know. But HB 491 was a big bill that came out. We discussed during the session. We're all starting to understand more and more what the impacts of this bill are. We're involved in the larger working group on this one that's run through the state, but we need input on this one as well. So there are potential other proposals that are going to come through on grandma throughout the interim. So if you're interested in helping us out on that one, let us know. Gravel, there's two big things that came out of the legislative session. One was HB 502, which is requiring the Division of Oil, Gas and Mining to do a study around aggregate and gravel. And we'll get involved with that. We'll have input on that one. But also SB 172, which did not pass, but had some revisions made to it. We're going to be having discussions that are outside of the 502 discussion with some of the folks in that industry. So if you're interested in talking about gravel, or you just want to talk about gravel, whether you're interested or not, that's one we need help on. Stormwater, HB 507 did pass, but it had a delayed implementation date until January of this next year. We need to have additional discussions on stormwater. This is also, as we'll show in a minute, one of the interim study items. So need an advisory group there. And UDOT coordination. This one is not around any specific legislation. There's not a specific bill that we need. What we're looking for is an opportunity, really as a delegation, maybe is a better term, to reach out to UDOT to have some discussions there to see what we can do as cities that help them, what they as UDOT can do to help us as cities. So we're just kind of looking for people who want to go talk to UDOT, strengthen ties there. Again, I'm calling this more of a delegation, maybe even an advisory group. But these are the ones that we need help with for right now. So, and I know all of you want to be on these groups, but if you want to be involved at these groups and these advisory groups, I guess the question is time commitment. These ones are not going to be as time intensive as some of these other groups. We anticipate we may meet once a month, we may meet twice a month for an hour or so to discuss what's going on this. But for the next few months, these are not going to be particularly time intensive. Now, that being said, if you show up to this meeting, and I hope you do, whatever these meetings are, then you may get pulled into a more intense work group later on, a strike force, a negotiating team, whatever that is. So these will probably lead to things, but over the summer, this is not going to be particularly intensive just yet. This is as we're getting our hands around things, this will help us get our direction and our bearings on these different groups. So with that, please feel free to email me. Some of you, Abby, you're fine. You emailed me already. That's awesome. Feel free to email me, jlee@ulct.org. You can be involved as in many of these groups as you want to, if you feel like really hanging out with us all summer long. But we'll get the list together. We'll put that together and then get some meetings out very soon from different league staffers. So any questions on what these groups look like or what we're trying to accomplish with these? Yeah, Lynn's got one. Angela, run up the mic.
All right, just a quick question. How does number A, Commission on Housing Affordability, how does that advisory group interplay with the committees Cameron was showing earlier?
So basically, yeah, that's a great question. So they'll have the committees and those sub-working groups. This will be a larger group where we'll come back and say, this is what we're discussing in these committees. Give us direction, give us parameters. Is this a good way to go? What are our lines? So this will be a place for us to come back and have touch points with a larger group of stakeholders about what's happening in those committees. So that's a good question. Yeah, and on top of all this, we have the land use task force that will be meeting. As always, we don't even have a slide on that one. It's there, but land use task force is also meeting, and that will be overlapping with what happened to the CHA group and other land use discussions. So good reminder, thanks. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, we see all your emails because you're knocking out. Now, what we want to do really quick is just run through. We've talked about the UEOC, and just again, as a reminder, the regular legislature does in fact also meet throughout the interim, as we mentioned. And just want to highlight some of the study items that each one of those committees is looking at throughout the year. Now, important to note that an interim study item doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a bill or legislation that comes out of this. It just means that the committee has decided on a list of things to look at. Not trying to overhype or underhype what interim study item, but the committee's particular is different states get legislation out of it. But these are a few of the things that they're going to look at this year. So in the Economic Development and Workforce Services Committee, looking around housing supply, show up several places, but this is one of the committees. Side of the CHA, outside of Land Use Task Force, this is just one more committee that is going to be looking at housing supply, looking at the Commission on Housing Stakeholders, looking at the regulations around ADUs, and looking at homelessness. So economic development is going to look at a lot of housing and homelessness. Law enforcement and criminal justice. So a few returning items we've seen the last few years. So implementation of HB 84 with school safety and security. This is some of the school guardian program. First responder agency operations, looking at mental health, the data portals. Corrections up with public safety matters. So nothing particularly new here. This is really a continuation of conversations from the past couple of years. In natural resources, this one shouldn't be a surprise. It's going to look at water. Water is the big one that we care about, but specifically several things here: saved water, fee authority for distribution of drinking water, funding for water-related capital projects. So that's more of the infrastructure discussion that we're having. Development of a water database. So a lot more discussions on water. This one's never going away. We're going to keep talking about water. It's just going to be different flavors of that every year. Rev and tax has a few big things. So looking at the sales and use tax, looking at transient room tax revenue, which I know a lot of people have wanted looked at. Looking at remote sales transactions, impacts of residents registering motor vehicles in another state, property tax. So looking at centrally assessed property, locally assessed property, property tax relief, and evaluating the multi-county appraisal trust. Other rev and tax issues, you see those on there, but rev and tax, as always, is looking at various and sundry tax issues. Transportation. A couple things here: long-term transportation planning, everything from UTA's long-range transit plan, future of light rail, Olympics transportation planning, which we've talked about today, the Utah Trails Network, station area plans, and then road usage charge program. So lots to happen in transportation. As you'll see, a lot of these interim topics overlap with what the UEOC is talking about. So just because it's being talked about in one area does not mean that another group cannot talk about it as well. So you'll see a lot of these overlapping and a lot of the same discussions going on in multiple places. Gov operations, this one is an interesting place for it to land. GovOps is not where you would normally see stormwater retention being talked about, but the co-chair of GovOps, Representative Cal Musselman, is the one who ran the stormwater bill last year. So GovOps is a place we spend a lot of time. GovOps is not a place we spend a lot of time talking about water historically. But again, we have a working group on this one, but this is one of the places that we will be talking about the stormwater issues. Yeah. Yeah, so there's been an interesting dialogue on transportation utility fee. It came out last week that again, the bill did not pass. We've talked about this quite a bit, but Representative Karen Peterson, after a certain nonprofit said we'd like to be exempted, stuck to her guns and said, we're just not going to run the bill at this point. Now, there was an interesting discussion that came out of the Transportation Committee. Well, Rev and Tax is actually where the tough came out. Sorry. The Rev and Tax Committee had an interesting discussion where some legislators did not think that this should be seen as a fee, but it should be seen more as a tax. And so there's going to be an ongoing debate, we think, around the transportation utility fee. Is this a fee? Is it a tax? And then that could spill over into wider ranging discussions about what are fees and what are taxes based on the way different legislators feel about the topic. So we do expect there to be ongoing discussions about this one. Again, in our larger work group talking about economic development, very likely that's where we'll have some preliminary discussions about the tough, and then think that will probably get narrowed down to, again, a smaller strike force as we go forward. Anything else you want to add on that one, Cam? Or that might, yeah, that one should go on.
Just one last reminder, as you're in budget season, if your city is considering a transportation utility fee this year, please let us know, because even though House Bill 367 did not pass, it is a bit of a safe harbor for us in proceeding with transportation utility fees. We have the legal authority to do it, and technically you can do a transportation utility fee however you see fit. That said, politically, you have a safe harbor with the framework that we outlined in House Bill 367. And I just want to piggyback on what Justin was just saying. We know there are groups out there right now who are trying to run legislation to repeal our authority to have transportation utility fees. So if your city's going to go through with it this year, great, you have the authority. Our strong recommendation is to use the 367 process. And if you're a city that already has a transportation utility fee, then just be on notice that there's a lot of eyeballs right now on your process and who you're charging and all those other details. So stay in close contact with us as this proceeds.
All right, last couple I'll mention in interim and political subdivisions, looking at conditional land use ordinances, impact fee reviews, and water credits and exactions. These are mostly ongoing conversations as well, but these are specific ones that are brought up. And now here, I'm going to jump out of this. Sure. Great, I'm going to cue this while we're going.
Thanks. I just wanted to note that this morning in UEOC, Joel Ferry, who's the director of natural resources, he brought up a water utility fee and he used it as an example. And he said $35,000 was the example of a water utility fee that's added to the cost of a new home. And I don't know where it costs $35,000, but he used that as an example. And it piqued my interest and made me go, okay, so what kind of legislation are we going to see then? If that's the example that pushes to eliminate impact fees for water. Anyway, I don't know, but just FYI, that piqued my interest and that was the example he used. And again, I don't know where it costs that. It doesn't cost nearly that much in our city, but I don't know where it does, but he used that example. So just be mindful as we go forward that seems like it could be a very real conversation during the interim.
Yeah, I expect that it will be. Mark's got his hand up. Are you saying that is you, or are you saying you have a comment on it? Okay, that's what it looked like from the way your hand was up.
So Mayor Ramsey, if you're buying Central Utah water, the cost of that is $18,000 per acre foot. So a home, if you're half an acre foot, is $9,000. And it depends on how much your secondary water usage is. So for example, if you don't have secondary water, a home is going to require pretty much a full acre foot. So you're $18,000 just on that. If you've got secondary water, it's closer to $3,000 an acre foot for that for outdoor irrigation, but those fees add up. And quite frankly, what Joel Ferry is trying to do at the state is take away our ability to reuse water. We have the opportunity to fully deplete our water rights. And part of what's going on was we were offered a safe harbor a few years ago for water reuse. They're trying to shut that down. He was quoted in the Trib back in, I want to say December, of saying cities need to not reuse their water. Well, if we're not able to fully deplete our water rights, guess what? We have to go buy more water rights. And so this is a very complex thing. We have a state that's talking out of both sides of its mouth. It's saying we need to have water for housing. Oh, by the way, we're going to subsidize businesses that come in. We've got a business that's coming into Utah County, 2 million gallons per day. How many homes do you think that takes off the table? 1,111 homes come off the table with that one business coming in using 2 million gallons a day. You multiply that by 4 people per household, and you removed 45,000 homes off of the discussion list, or 45,000 people off of the list for us to provide affordable housing for. So it is a very complex issue. And while Joel may want to take it off, who's going to pay for it? How are we going to subsidize water? How are we going to be able to reuse water? The treatment cost for reusing water is somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 an acre foot. So it's an incredibly expensive proposition. You mentioned in us preparing for the Olympics, the need for us to sort out our water issues. Well, I'm telling you, if we're starting to treat lake water, it's going to be really, really expensive. And so the things that are being made, the issue discussion points, we want to showcase Utah. That's great. But water is going to be the driving factor. and sewer treatment is going to be the driving factor. And both of those are going to directly be impacting the price of housing. And so you can't divorce yourself from the issues and say that cities are causing this. The policies the state's enacting is causing these problems and causing them to compound. It's incredibly complex, but there is no simple solution. And frankly, there's no cheap solution, because the only solutions we're being given is to take and ask other people to subsidize the cost for others. And so where we're going to take from the rich to give to the poor, that's what this is all boiling down to in the grand calculus of things. Sorry, passion button.
Angela, have you run back over to Mayor Ramsey, and then we got a couple more minutes. We're going to wrap up here.
Mark, I appreciate your passion, and to be clear, I'm not Joel Ferry. So take your comments to him, and I will do the same. But I wasn't advocating for what he was saying. I'm informing this body. Just to be clear.
All right. So the last thing I want to mention, Governor had his press conference last week, his monthly press conference. And one of the questions that was asked him was about the housing plan. And so I want to play this quick clip. Maybe 2 minutes, we'll have quick comments, and then we'll get everyone out of here.
Governor, yesterday during interim meetings, lawmakers reviewed the legislative housing audit, and Steve Waldrop said he's working on putting together a proposed statewide plan, maybe before next legislative session. Is there anything you think should be for sure in that statewide plan?
Well, those are conversations that are ongoing. We're so proud of what happened this last legislative session. Again, I've mentioned it many times. Sorry, I keep talking about it, but it's so important that we've got to build those starter homes, and we actually have the tools to do that now. And so the next few months are going to be very instructive as we move forward to see a couple things. One, are lenders going to get into this game? And we think they are. Everything we're hearing from lenders is they want to do this, where they're going to partner with state funds to give those loans that will be paid back. And so the real big one is, are developers going to get in on this? Are developers willing to go build? And we're asking them, look, again, you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit. I know you could build bigger things and make more money, but we're hoping to make it up with scale. If you're building a lot more of these smaller homes, you'll still make money. It's just going to take a little more work. But there's this kind of moral imperative to do this for our kids and our grandkids, and that it will help them in the long run. If they can build these houses now, these are people who will move into bigger houses later. So there is a tail to this that will pay off. So will they participate? The second one we'll be watching really closely are, will cities and towns participate? Are they really going to implement these new starter home zones that will allow for a little more density for smaller homes, but that will allow for home ownership? And we're making that kind of moral imperative request and trying to persuade them on that issue as well. And so those two things, I think, will help determine what kind of goes into that plan as we move forward, and we'll be watching closely.
Any takers so far?
Yeah, again, the money isn't available yet, but we do have several builders that have said we're in, we're all in, and then we have some cities that have already changed some zoning approvals where the developer has gone back and said, I know we got an approval for 4 homes per acre. We now want to do 10 homes. Will you change that approval for us so we can participate in this zone? And we're getting some yeses, which is hopeful.
You willing to identify who the builders are?
There's been some in the news. I know Nielsen Homes is one of those. I don't have the list in front of me right now, but there are certainly others.
All right. So yeah, for anyone that didn't hear that online, which is probably everybody, it sounds like, basically, and this is what I want to bring up here. As you know, a lot of times in the past, the governor has brought up that cities, you've got to do more, cities, you got to do more. And he's still saying that. He's still saying cities, we need you to do some more. But I hope you heard the differences there, that he brought in developers need to change what they're doing as well. He said, developers, we need you to change what you're building. You may need to make a little less money, but it's on you to help with this as well. He also said, we need lenders to come to the table. So while he's still asking the cities to do stuff, he's saying we need to change some of what we're looking at, some of these tools that are past this legislative session. I just want everyone to catch the fact that the governor brought in developers, is also saying, developers, we need you to change what you're doing as well. the discussion's not going away. The housing discussion is going to be here probably forever. This isn't going to change next week, but the conversation is starting to change. There is a recognition from the governor and others of everything that cities are doing. And a lot of that comes from the conversations you're having with legislators, the conversations we have as we take board members, the executive team and others to meet with the governor. The message is trickling back up there that we're not the only reason that things aren't changing. So this is a positive thing. In my mind, when I saw this, I thought that's great. He actually led out with developers being the ones that needed to change things, not just on us as cities. So wanted to make sure everybody saw that this is positive. Again, the discussion's not going away. So the ask here is if you are making changes, if you are implementing the FIZ or the HOPS or an infrastructure financing district or whatever it is, if you're using any of these new tools from this last legislative session, excuse me, please let us know. If you tell us that those things are happening, we can start aggregating some of that information, take those anecdotes, those stories and that data back as we're having these conversations, and that will help us. So with that, Kate, I think we are about at the point we need to adjourn, which I know is your favorite part of the meeting. So with that, just gonna throw up a few events that are coming up here. We have a lot of regional events that are coming up. If you're in these regions, 5 counties, sort of R6, we're gonna be in your neighborhoods in the next day or two. Also, our next LPC, again, August 19th, right before our annual convention. So we'll maybe see many of you in work groups, but not anything before then. But with that, Kate, I think we can shut her down.
I'm so excited that I'm here for this.
I know you are.
Well, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Oh, it sounds like everyone wants to stay. We don't have a second.
We're going in the back.
We're gonna run the back? Okay, there we go. My colleague Richard. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I guess we can adjourn.